All right, now in this video, what we're focusing on is some principles for facilitating a good Bible discussion. Okay, so we actually have 10 principles that we've come up with. Now, obviously, this isn't necessarily exhaustive. There's other things you can be doing. So, like, we may miss a couple things here, but these are the 10 principles that we want you to really be dedicated to making sure you're trying to do each time you're facilitating a Bible discussion. Okay, so the first one, and this is kind of obvious, but the first one is be prepared. All right, if you just show up and you haven't thought at all about the text or really what you're doing, it's going to be difficult to really facilitate a good Bible discussion. All right. Now, what we mean by this is be prepared. Is not just have read the text through, but have a direction that you want to take people in. And for us at Holy Trinity, the way we think of this is we want to have an idea of the theme and the aim of the text. Now, there's different ways that we do community group Bible discussions at Holy Trinity. There's times where we have studies that we've written. There's times we purchase different studies that are written. And there's other times that we just follow the sermons. Okay? Now this year we're focusing on following the sermon. So the theme and the aim will be coming out of the sermon. But let me just define theme and aim for you so you can have that in my mind as you're trying to facilitate discussion. A theme is the main point of the text. Okay? I use the main theological point of the text. The aim is the main application of the text. Now obviously those two are very related and sometimes they can completely overlap. But we want you coming into the discussion to be prepared to try and lead the discussion towards people understanding the main point of the text that you're looking at and the main application to their lives. Okay, so that's the first point. Be prepared. The second point, and this is the second principle, this is really important, is don't talk too much or lecture or preach. What we are asking you to do as a community group leader, or asking others to do that you may ask to facilitate discussion, is not to be the Bible teacher or the preacher. We're not asking you to teach a lesson on the text. What we're asking you to do is to facilitate a discussion. So if you are talking more than 50% of the time, there's times where you may talk about 50% of the time, or even if you're up to 50% of the time, it's likely that you're talking too much. You want to be trying to get everyone involved. This is a discussion that you are having, so make sure you don't talk too much or lecture or preach. The third is related to this, and that's that we want you to be aware of the external processor in your group. So you may not be someone who's really tempted to talk too much. You'll be really good at facilitating discussion. But there's likely to be someone in your group who will want to talk too much and will almost be processing things and just kind of talking out loud. You want to be aware of that and know how do you actually move it off that person to have other people interact with what they're saying or interact with the text. One of the best ways you can do this is through asking them a question. Interrupt them to say, well, what do you think about this? Or something, or what do other people think about what this person is saying? So find some way to move off the external processor. So basically you want to make sure that you aren't dominating the conversation, and you also want to make sure that others aren't dominating the conversation as well. Okay, so be prepared, don't talk too much, and be aware of the external processor, so make sure other people aren't talking that much. And then fourth, define terms. Now what we mean by this is that hopefully there's going to be people in your group that have grown up in the church and really know a lot, but there will probably also be those who haven't grown up in the church, that may be very new to Christianity or aren't even a believer yet. Now there are certain things that we say in Christianity, that we say in Christian circles, that we completely understand, but that others have no idea about. And this can be as simple as a term like saved. What does saved mean? Well, to a Christian, we know what that means. But if you go to the street and you ask any random person, if they are not a believer, if they didn't grow up in the church or something like that, they could have no idea what we refer to when we talk about being saved. So simple terms like that we should be trying to just quickly define. I'm not talking about having a long explanation, but a quick definition. Other terms, of course, like justification or sanctification, some big terms we can either find in the text or we can be talking about. Make sure we're actually defining what are these things. But then also, just historical things within the Bible. So certain people, Abraham, Moses, David, we might know who they are, but does everyone else in the group know who they are? And can we refer to historical things like coming out of Egypt, when God brought Israel out of Egypt, or the time of the Judges? Make sure you briefly explain them, just one sentence, 4 words or 7 words, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page, okay? Now 5, and this is really getting into what you should be doing during the time that you are facilitating a discussion, and that is asking good questions. We have to be sure that when we're facilitating a discussion that we are asking good questions. Now, you'll notice that on this module, we actually attached a sheet that you can look over the type of questions that you should be asking. Okay, so we really encourage you, use that document. It's a really important document. But generally speaking, a good question is one that's open-ended, okay? You're trying to facilitate a discussion. So if you ask questions that are yes or no answers, it's a discussion killer, because all people say is yes or no. And it can very easily to just frame it a little bit different. So rather than asking a question, does this mean this, which is a yes or no question, say, what do you think this means? Now, that can be a little bit more intimidating because you're not really directing the conversation so much, you're opening up, but that's the point. You want to be having more open conversation. So asking simple questions like, what do you think about this? How would you define this? How would you put this in your own words? Those are simple questions, but you're opening up to the floor. And it might be as simple as, if you're going after the theme and the aim, again, to ask the question, what do you think is the main point of this text? And have a 20-minute discussion on that. What do you think is the main application of the text? That's very open-ended, and then have a discussion on that. So asking good questions. But something that has to go along with this can be difficult for people, especially when they first started facilitating community group discussions, is you have to accept silence and be okay with long pauses. When you ask open-ended questions, what you will often get in groups is silence. And you have to be okay with that. Okay? It doesn't necessarily mean that your question was bad. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to interject. You need to kind of let it sit there for a little while and let someone answer. Now you can, if you say, would it be helpful if I rephrased the question? But don't just assume that you need to start talking when there is silence. Silence actually usually leads to discussion. So after you ask an open-ended question, be willing to sit there. Sit there in the silence. Now, one thing you can do if there's too much silence, which is possible to happen, is ask questions to specific people, okay? So what you can do is you can ask this open-ended question, saying, what do you think about this? But then direct it to one person saying, okay, Joel, what do you think about this? What do you think this means? Now you need to be careful here, because we can be tempted to do this only with the quiet people in the group, but we don't want to only do it with the quiet people in the group. Yet you want to use it for the quiet people in the group. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is that do this to make sure you kind of spread this around. Okay, if you can get into the habit of this, maybe you do it 3 times in your entire study. Make sure you ask people who talk a lot and people who don't talk very often, so that people who are quiet don't feel like they're being targeted. But this is a great way to keep the conversation moving and to get people involved who haven't really been talking yet, saying, okay, Joel, what do you think of this? And hopefully Joel hasn't said anything yet, and you're drawing them into the conversation, but it also moves the conversation along. And that's the 8th thing I want to bring up here. Keep the conversation somewhat focused, okay? This means that you need to keep trying to direct it in that way you've been thinking about beforehand, towards that theme and that aim. But here, I say somewhat focused, because rabbit trails are okay. Okay, they're not always a bad thing to go on rabbit trails, but sometimes they can go way too far. And so it's okay if sometimes you start discussing some things, and maybe it's not the point of the text, but it's a really important thing. So is God just? Or like going on about what does it mean for God to be trying, or something like that. Maybe it's not the main point of the text, but it's something that's coming out from the discussion that you should go on for a little while. That's fine if you go on those rabbit trails, but don't let it completely monopolize the conversation. So let those kind of things happen, but then bring it back. So you want to keep the conversation moving toward that direction, always somewhat focused. So that's always kind of in the periphery at the very least. 9, drive home application and make it specific. Okay? This can be difficult in these kind of discussions when you're facilitating a Bible discussion. But what you do not want to be doing is just kind of having extremely general applications. And I think, again, this is really hard within community groups. We're usually okay with kind of general applications. So like, we should trust God. We should believe in Jesus. We should think that Jesus is better than everyone else. Those things are all true. That's very good. But can you make it concrete? Can you get people to talk about, how do you doubt God? What are the things that you think? What are the things that you say that actually show that you don't believe God? What are the things that you do that actually show that you think other things are better than Christ? Try to really drive into the application. Get specific with it. Get concrete with it. And that's something that you need to be thinking about yourself. I think that as you prepare to come in to leading the study, you should be thinking about, how do I need to apply this to my life? I want to get to specific ways, because when we can give examples, these kind of things from our own life, it really helps everyone else start to understand. So that's another thing I'd say, drive home application and try to make it specific. And then 10, end with prayer. Okay, this is something we talked about in the last video, but make sure you end with prayer. And if you can end with prayer, we're saying, how can we pray about these specific things? And that application you just went over. So if you have a specific application, concrete application, people were sharing about the specific ways in their life that they need to be shaped by this text, saying, okay, let's go to prayer and let's pray for these people about these specific things. Okay, so those are the 10 principles we want you to be dedicated to. So again, be prepared. Okay, have a direction, a theme and aim that you're going to lead the conversation toward. 2, don't talk too much or lecture or preach. You're facilitating a discussion. All right, you're not there as the expert or the teacher. But also, number 3, don't let others talk too much. Don't let people monopolize the time for just themselves or just externally process everything. But actually interject so you can keep the conversation moving and get other people involved. 4, define terms. Make sure that everyone's on the same page. They understand simple things like saved, justification, sanctification, Abraham, Moses, David, and other things like that. 5, ask good questions by making them open-ended. Don't let one-word answers be okay. Facilitate a discussion. Try and draw things out. And I'd even say, just to add to that a little bit, that sometimes when people say something, like state an opinion, you can just say the simple question, do other people agree? Now that might make that person uncomfortable, but that's a great way of actually that's driving the conversation forward. Help people discuss these specific things. That's a good question that you can ask. 6, when you ask good questions that are open-ended, accept the silence. Be okay with long pauses. That is okay in these kind of discussions. But 7, one way that you can counteract too many long pauses is asking questions to specific people, and especially if they haven't been involved in the conversation yet. Okay, so ask questions to specific people. 8, keep the conversation somewhat focused. Rabbit trails are okay. There's some really important topics you need to deal with, but keep it moving in the direction that you've prepared. 9, drive home the application, make it specific. Maybe we'll talk about the concrete things in their lives that they need to change. And then 10, out of those concrete things that you just talked about, end with prayer. Split up into different groups with the men and women